Okay, I think we can begin now. So I just want to say good afternoon, kind of hi there, and thank you very much, all of you, for joining us on this webinar. I'm really pleased with the turnout, so thank you very much. This webinar episode kicks off the webinar series that we at Psychological Consultancy Limited are producing. Here we are focusing on emotional intelligence and the psychometric tool that we distribute called the EQI 2.0, which measures emotional intelligence, and we will speak specifically about leaders and their EQI. So we can just get started now. I just want to introduce myself first of all. So my name is Priya Patel. I am a consultant business psychologist at PCL, and I am joined here by Jackie Barber, who is an associate for PCL. She is a business psychologist and an executive coach. We both use emotional intelligence and the EQI psychometric tool in our work, but in quite different ways. Here I will be talking you through the concept of emotional intelligence with regards to leadership. We will take a quick look at the EQI model, and then Jackie will take you through coaching leaders with emotional intelligence. Feel free to write comments in the chat function, and if you have questions, can you send them directly to me, the host Priya. They will get answered either during or after the webinar. And we would like to record this and have it available for people so that they could watch it later if they couldn't make it today. So if you could keep your cameras off to allow us to do that, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, we can get started now. So why EI? So EI being emotional intelligence, that phrase that might get bandied around a lot or is thought to be this big overarching term that describes any and all human interaction, or maybe just anything to do with emotional conversations or events. Well, okay, that's not exactly true or right, but let's get to the why first of all. We know that EQ predicts job success at a similar rate or a higher rate than IQ does, IQ being a measure of general cognitive intelligence. The results do vary on this, but we also know that the people that you grew up with or people that you know currently, who may be seen as quite successful in their home and their working lives, may not be the people that you saw at school who were the most successful in their academic pursuits. And additionally, those individuals who were at the top of their class at school in most subjects and excelled at the exams and the essays in their schooling, you know, they can fall short in their professional lives. There's been a number of studies across the years since the 90s that predict the impact IQ versus EQ has on job success and general life success factors. And there are some mixed results, but overall, there is something here that is clearly showing us that it's not enough to be the smartest person in the room. You need to be the person that can read the room, that can be an influencing voice, that can react appropriately. You need to be aware of your own strengths and your developmental areas or your performance gaps, so that you know what you bring to the table and you can then deal effectively with challenges or change that arises. And all of these things that I'm talking about now, that's emotional intelligence, and it's crucial. So the quote that you can see on screen now, it's from over 20 years ago now. It's not a new direction of thinking. We've seen this for a while. There is a wealth of knowledge, research, and cases on this, but the overall picture that we get at the end is that higher emotional intelligence leads to more business success. And that's one of the reasons why it's probably had such an uptake across industries. So what is EI? It's been talked about since the 1960s, but it had a bit of a turbo power in the 80s and the 90s after new insight on the topic was published. So well, what is it? It is emotional and social tactical skills that collectively make up our perceptions of ourselves, of how we express ourselves, how we interact and influence and maintain relationships with others, also how we cope with adversity, and just our resilience. And EI looks at how we process and use emotional intelligence in a meaningful way. So emotional and social skills, that's highlighted there because it means that emotional intelligence is not something that remains at a fixed point for your whole life. What we know is that emotional intelligence can be developed upon, improved with increased self-awareness, experience, training, developmental activities or coaching, and EI can really be a coach's best friend. And Jackie will talk more about coaching and emotional intelligence later on. But we can work on our own emotional intelligence in a way that makes our emotions work for us instead of against us. And just on this topic now, what does get asked a lot is this a fad that's going away soon? Well, no, that doesn't really look to be the case. It seems to be that the concept of emotional intelligence is being more widely understood in the working world. And then the more people understand it, the more support it's getting, the more it's being used more and more for development and coaching. And EI is something that everyone has, and it affects you at home and at work, and it affects everyone around you. So it makes sense why more and more people are getting on board. And just to give you an idea of the importance currently in the talent management professionals and in the working world that EI is getting. So a 2011 Career Builder survey of more than 2,000 hiring managers and HR professionals were surveyed. And they reported that 71% of them valued emotional intelligence in an employee over IQ. And that 75% of them said that they were more likely to promote a highly emotional, intelligent employee. And then the final result that I wanted to report is that 59% of them claimed that they would actually pass up a candidate who had high IQ but was low on emotional intelligence. So it just shows you the importance currently about EQ and EI. So what do we know about leadership? I just want to talk a bit about leadership, and I know that it's a topic that we all know a lot about, so I just want to summarize what we know about it in general. So context is important. So people's needs from a leader do vary depending on the situation. Employees judge their leaders mostly by their actions and less on what they say. Leadership qualities can come naturally to some, and by that I mean that some people can have a natural ability to lead others. So their personality or their experiences affords them a leader-like quality that is just natural to them. This may not mean that they actually know how to lead their specific team or tend to work harder at being a better leader for them. And leadership can be learned. So those people that may not have as much of that natural leadership quality, that doesn't mean that they can't learn how to lead or be highly effective at it. And great leaders are self-aware. And this works really well to our favor because emotional intelligence starts with being self-aware. And you can see why professionals who have a say over other people's jobs and their working lives need to understand themselves first of all better to know how to support and communicate with a member of their team, for example. And there are certain characteristics that keep showing up as hallmarks of effective leadership. And I kind of want to pass it on to you now. So in the chat function, please let us know what you think that great leaders have in common across industries and business type. Maybe what do you want in your leader, or what do you do as a leader that you think makes you effective at your role? So just in the chat function, and I can already see it's filling up, so thank you very much for your responses. I'll just wait a moment for them to come in. And there are so many leadership models and theories out there. I searched Amazon books on leadership and I actually got 60,000 results just for the UK market. And a lot of the content out there competes with each other. Some of it overlaps, but I just want to try and figure out if there's anything that we could agree upon now. So what do I want in a leader? What do you want in a leader? And I'm just going to read some of the responses. So great communication skills, authenticity, strong communication skills again, shows confidence in others, is receptive to feedback, they actively listen. Okay, so communication skills kind of all wrapped in there together. Fairness is interesting, thanks Bruce. And then empathy, being a role model, being accessible, okay. And great communication, empathy and direction from Sarah. Open to ideas, courageous, a good listener, wisdom, insight and humility from Leslie, so thank you very much. And situational adaptivity, I like that, thanks Nick. Emotional intelligence from Andrew Richard, sorry, thank you. And insight and self-awareness, authenticity. Okay, so there's a lot here. Some of the common responses that come up from time to time are on the screen now. So what have we got here? Listened to me, communicated their expectations with me, followed through on what they said, inspired me, delegated responsibility to me, and then trusted me to take it on. So there are some things that overlap with what some of you are thinking. These characteristics that are on screen right now are all related to emotional intelligence. There are definitely other leadership factors that aren't, but I think the major crux of the leadership qualities are emotional intelligence factors. So I think it's worth putting in the work for the development of your EI skills. So just on this before we move on, transformational leadership is quite a popular and accepted leadership model across quite a lot of different industries. Jackie will be covering this in her section. So I've just got some examples of some well-known leaders on screen right now. So we have Jacinda Ardern, who is the New Zealand Prime Minister, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Sir Alex Ferguson, Gloria Steinem, Angela Merkel, Barack Obama, Idris Elba. So, okay, so all quite varied examples of leadership. Some controversial, some less so, some good or bad. That's for other people to judge. With leaders that are quite famous for their contributions to their field, there is a mix in there of people who arguably gained their footing in the industry because of who they knew, their connections, or was it their tenacity, their ideas, the fact that they strived forward with something and did it better than others did at the time. I'm personally of the opinion that leaders that have a legacy for their staying power, for their relevance, their long-term success are the ones that leveraged and worked on their social and emotional functioning. There's always other factors involved, but Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, they have said themselves that they wouldn't have gone on to achieve their long-term success without stopping and understanding the people around them more and the influence that they themselves had that they could use to achieve their goals better. So what does this actually matter? What does it actually matter if you've got a leader that has high emotional intelligence or not? Why are they going to be really any different to any other leader? What we know is that emotions have a contagion effect, And this is actually probably the type of contagion that we actually want to hear right now. We know that leaders significantly influence the mood and feelings of their employees and the team. A lot of people have been there and felt that firsthand. I certainly have. But the empirical research conducted suggests that leaders who have higher emotional intelligence create enthusiasm in their employees. And that is actually a major function of being a leader. Leaders with high emotional intelligence do this because they understand how to react to different emotional events that happen at work. They know that they can influence other people's moods from their own. They actually have a good understanding of knowing that they can build a good foundation for their team through sharing and leveraging emotional events at work, for example. And another reason that emotional intelligence is really important in leaders is that research shows that leaders' emotional intelligence affects an employee's job satisfaction just as much as the employee's own emotional intelligence. And that's a really, really powerful research piece. And we all know that job satisfaction is directly related to many factors, including productivity, citizenship behaviors, motivation, staying in the role for longer. And these are just some of the research links with emotional intelligence. There's a lot more that can't be covered in this time slot, but these are pretty much the important reasons why leaders need to be emotionally intelligent. Okay, so some people love a model to tie a concept all together. And if you are one of those people, then you will like this. So this model is based on the original EQI model by Reuven Bar-On. The EQI 2.0 psychometric tool measures emotional intelligence in individuals, and the assessment is based upon this EQI model. So the model consists of 5 realms that each have 3 scales. So the first one at the top is the self-perception realm. And on the whole, this is about your ability to know and manage yourself. And it's made up of 3 scales. I'll just introduce you to a little. Emotional self-awareness is your ability to recognize how you're feeling, why you feel that way, what the impact you have on yourself and others is from the way that you are feeling. Self-regard here is recognizing your strengths, your weaknesses, your developmental areas, and feeling content or good about yourself despite these areas. Self-actualization is being your ability to try and improve yourself and pursue the goals that you have to help you towards leading a richer and more fulfilled life. Now, I'll briefly explain the other 4 realms, but I won't go into details about their individual scales. The self-expression realm is basically about how you face the world, how you express your thoughts and your feelings, it's your influencing ability and whether you can be self-directed or kind of stand on your own 2 feet. And then the gold interpersonal realm here is overall looking at your people skills. So getting on and interacting well with others, helping and supporting others, appreciating their feelings and maintaining your relationships with other people. The green realm is decision making, and it's about using emotional information to effectively solve problems or make decisions. So here you're looking at impulsive or spontaneous decision making and making sure that you perceive situations as they really are. And then the last realm, so it's blue and it's titled stress management. And this is concerning your ability to be flexible with your thoughts and your actions, to tolerate stress or challenges and remain optimistic or hopeful about the way that things will turn out. The EQI model and the reports that are generated will also give you a happiness indication. So happiness here is a product of and a contributor to emotional intelligence. And so in this context, you can use the EQI tool to tell you more about how a person's overall well-being is on top of their emotional and social skills. And just to kind of reiterate, these are all developable skills that you can improve upon these areas through self-awareness or coaching, for example. And okay, so what is important with EQI? I think the main aim of doing an emotional intelligence assessment is to increase the individual's self-awareness. So your client hopefully will come out of that discussion or discussions with a better understanding of themselves and how they come across to others. What we also want from them is to find out their strengths and the areas that they are not currently leveraging as a strength. So the parts of themselves that they can utilize more to get on with what they want and get what they want from work or their personal lives. And when we get a person's EQI report, we ultimately want to balance the scales, and we want them to look at leveraging their strengths to make up or build up those developmental areas. And this is something that Jackie will talk about more now. She is an executive coach and business psychologist, and she will provide her insight and experience on how to use EQ in a coaching context. So I will hand over to her now.
So hi, I'm Jackie. I'm a business psychologist and coach, and I train practitioners. I previously trained practitioners using the EQI tool, and I now coach leaders using the assessment. So I thought it would be helpful to share some of my experiences today for anyone who's looking to get certified in the tool or to use coaching in their organisation. So Priya's talked about what an emotionally effective leader looks like and some of the characteristics and the competencies that we associate with that. And I thought this quote from the Centre for Creative Leadership was really interesting because it talks about the huge extent to which emotional competencies impact leaders' careers. And it states that as many as 3/4 of careers are derailed due to various issues relating to emotional skills. And of course, it's not just the individuals themselves who are impacted, but also their teams who are suffering the consequences of their boss struggling to get a handle on these issues. And this quote also specifically talks about times of difficulty or conflict, which of course is very highly relevant right now. And even if we think about in what we would consider more normal times, the literature clearly shows the leadership advantage of increasing EQ in terms of outcomes like performance, interpersonal relationships, and employee engagement. But the current situation with COVID-19 is putting an even greater demand on these skills for leaders, because really they're at the sharp end of having to oversee multiple and ongoing changes in the workplace. They're having to manage teams working virtually, and perhaps now having split teams where they've got some in the office while others are at home, and then having a responsibility to be equitable in how they're treating those two groups. They've also had to flex to different modes and frequency of communications, and being remote can make it more difficult to tune into how employees are feeling in order to motivate and to support them. And this is at a time when there are particular challenges around employee well-being, as each individual will have their own unique set of pressures and circumstances. So there's clearly lots of demand on leaders who need to both lead and support their teams effectively and be a good role model, but also to have strategies to manage their own levels of stress and well-being, because it can be lonely for those at the top. So before we dive into EQI 2.0 and think about how it can help in a coaching context, I thought it would be useful to have a quick look at what's going on in our brains when we're managing our emotions effectively. Developing our EQ involves increasing the connections between the emotional center of our brain, so that's the limbic system, and the prefrontal cortex over here, which is responsible for our rational, logical decision making. And our emotions are generated in the limbic system. It's what's responsible for that kind of lightning quick emotional reaction that we have to situations. And our brains are really still wired for the days like thousands of years ago when our ancestors were living on the plains of the savannah and they needed to move quickly to get out of the way of danger, such as coming face to face with a saber-toothed tiger. There wasn't time for them to hang around and figure out how friendly or not the tiger was. So our brains are designed so that danger signals bypass the rational part of our brains to tell our bodies to move and to get out of the way of danger. And thankfully, that's what has ultimately ensured our survival. It's what creates the fight or flight response that we experience when we're in threatening situations. And it's still really essential, that we need it. But as the threats these days tend to be much more psychosocial rather than physical, our immediate emotional reaction to situations can be unhelpful. And if we don't regulate our emotions effectively by engaging the prefrontal cortex, then the negative emotions can surface more easily and then take over the mind. And then this can impact our attentional capacity, our decision making, the quality of our relationships, and also our mental health and our performance. And you can think of the emotional brain a bit like a lion and the rational brain like the tamer. And the lion is always more powerful, which it needs to be. But the tamer can train and manipulate the lion in certain ways and distract it from harmful actions and then focus its attention on more positive ones. So part of emotional intelligence is increasing the connections between these parts of the brain so that we manage our emotions more effectively rather than being managed by them. And in order to do this, we need to be able to accurately read our emotions, understand why we're having them, and then know how and when to express them. So I've listed here some different examples of areas of EQ that I've supported clients with, from developing self-confidence and managing responses to setbacks, to interpersonal relationships and managing stress and well-being. Which is obviously particularly an issue at the moment, particularly as the lines between work and home have become much more blurred for many people. Okay, so when coaching to develop emotional intelligence in leaders, a crucial starting point is to gain a strong measure of where the coachee is now in terms of their strengths and their blind spots so that they can then set goals for the future. And as a coach, what I like about the EQI model is that it's very comprehensive. There's 15 different subscales that allow you to drill down into the detail and see how the different components of EQ are working, either with or against each other. And then there's the overall well-being scale, and that's a separate scale, and it's often helpful to start with that during a debrief session, as it gives an indication about the extent to which someone is feeling satisfied and feeling contented with life. You also get 2 reports for each assessment that you run. So you get one for the coach, so one for the coach and one for the coachee. And I've used a number of different psychometrics, and the EQI tool is the only one that I've come across that actually shows you how coachees have responded at the individual item level. And this is really helpful because a crucial part of that initial debrief is validating the report and understanding the extent to which the coachee feels that the results are kind of representing their own truths. And so the item responses enable you to understand a bit more about the nuance of the results, and also to identify if there's any discrepancies between how the individual sees themselves and how they've scored in the assessment. The coach report also gives you some follow-up questions to help you to probe into each of the scales a bit more. So, for example, a question like, describe a time when you've regretted not expressing your true thoughts or feelings about something, and then what the consequences were. And it gives you a step-by-step guide to conducting a debrief session. And over time, you might feel that you don't need to use those aspects of the report as much, but they can be really helpful as prompts, particularly when you first start out using the tool. Here I wanted to just give a quick overview of how EQI can work within a coaching engagement. Typically, there's an initial meeting with the sponsoring organisation to understand specifically what they want to get out of the coaching sessions from an organisational perspective. A recent example of an engagement is with a high growth startup that I've been working on with PCL, and they're a very successful technology company, very highly technical staff, and they approached PCL to help enhance emotional intelligence to ensure that leaders have got the necessary skills as they're going on to the next stage of growth for the company. And they particularly wanted to target leadership and senior management for coaching, both from a people management perspective, but also in terms of role modelling behaviours across the organisation. And doing this helps to create a shared language and a shared culture around EQ, and also helps leaders to be able to observe and feed back to each other. So once those objectives have been agreed, the individual takes the assessment and then they receive feedback on their results. And during this debrief, different themes will emerge, and from there I work with individuals to understand what their personal objectives are in relation to their specific roles and situations, and also what success looks like. We'll typically have between about 4 and 6 sessions where we explore more specific goals and strategies to enhance EQ and bring scales that are out of balance into line. We'll talk about how to anticipate and overcome obstacles, and then discuss actions that the client would like to commit to undertake, and ultimately to work towards self-coaching. So at the end of the assignment, say around about the 6-month mark, we'll be looking to reassess in order to look at progress and perhaps get feedback from colleagues and peers. And this tends to be most effective when it's done using the EQ 360 because the scales for the raters are all aligned with the self-report scales. So it helps you to kind of compare apples with apples. So when your coachee has completed the assessment and you're preparing for your first coaching debrief, there are some sections of the report that can be particularly helpful to review. Firstly, within the leadership report, you're given this lens through which to view the results. And this is based on the transformational model of leadership that Priya referenced earlier on. So the 4 competencies here include being an authentic leader who serves as a role model, effectively coaching team members, providing insight in terms of purpose and vision, and being innovative and taking appropriate risks, as well as being open to challenge and feedback. So these 4 areas and the subscales that underlie them are all associated with productivity, with lower employee turnover, and increased efficiency. And it's based on research that MHS, who publishes the EQI tool, conducted on 220 leaders who took the EQI assessment, and then also another assessment measuring performance across these 4 leadership areas. And as a group, the leaders behind this research had significantly higher emotional intelligence than the general population. Their average scores on the assessment were 14 points higher. So high scores on these subscales help to ensure better functioning in that area. So depending on the individual's personal role and their objectives, you can identify if there's specific scales here to focus on in order to enhance that area. And the leadership reports also provide a leadership bar, and that allows you to compare your clients' results with the scores of the top leaders, so those that had their scores in the top 50% of the leader sample. And these metrics are of particular interest to most leaders who want to really be optimizing their skills. The second set of leadership results that you'll want to review are the derailers. And these are particular subscales that coaches will typically want to avoid low scores in, so those below 90, as they're associated with a more passive or avoidant leadership style as opposed to transformational. And just taking one of these, for example, so low impulse control, this could indicate that a coachee has got a tendency to jump to hasty conclusions and appear impatient in decision making, perhaps to be seen as erratic at times, and that can then send mixed messages to team members. So strategies to enhance this area or to address this here could be about paying closer attention to how often they interrupt other people, how much they try to control conversations or quickly change direction, as well as looking at the triggers for those behaviours. Another one here, so lower problem solving, that could indicate a tendency to become overwhelmed by the responsibility of making a decision, or maybe ruminating about a problem rather than implementing solutions. So development strategies here could be around breaking down tasks into smaller chunks to simplify the problem, or maybe putting some parameters around the amount of information gathering. So it's important to look at these skills in the context of the individual's role and the organisation when planning your session. There's really a lot of information in the reports, and they're really helpful for planning to explore different themes. But I'd also say that it's really important not to overplan or to make too many assumptions when going into a session, because you want to remain open-minded and really interpret the results in the context of the client's specific role and their situation. Okay, so here I thought I would take one of the scales of the EQI model to look at in a bit more depth from a coaching perspective. So I chose the interpersonal composite of the EQI model, and specifically the empathy subscale. I know empathy was one of the comments that came up in the chat box of looking at effective leadership. And it really does have a big bearing on how a leader is perceived, and particularly in the current situation we're in now. According to the Centre for Creative Leadership, managers who show more empathy towards their direct reports are viewed as better performers by their bosses. So it's a really powerful interpersonal tool, but then it often falls by the wayside when we need it most. So during stressful times, for example. And people that score lower in this area, they can be seen to be insensitive or disconnected from their teams. They might find it harder to have difficult conversations because they might be very quick to speak up to defend their position. And that's particularly if their emotional self-expression is higher than their empathy on the EQI as well. So empathy is all about tuning into what and how and why people feel and think as they do. It's not about being nice, it's about seeing and experiencing the world from another person's perspective. And really the first step to enhancing this area is about listening. And so that's not just to what a person is saying, but also about their tone, their intonation, their body language. And Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about how empathetic listening gives you accurate data to work with. So rather than projecting your own autobiography and assuming thoughts and feelings and motivations, you're actually dealing with the reality inside another person's head and in their heart as well. I had an example myself a number of years ago when I was working in corporate communications, and I was in a meeting with one of my direct reports, and she was feeling very stressed about an event that she was organising, and she was running through about the amount of work that she had, about the deadlines, about the challenges that she was facing. And obviously I wanted to help and I wanted to support her, so I was jumping in with solutions about getting additional resources, or maybe speaking to colleagues to help her. And then actually I realized afterwards that really what she wanted me to do was to listen and to validate what she was saying and how she was feeling. And actually sort of jumping in with solutions can actually make people feel dismissed. So in retrospect, it would have been much more helpful to give her the space to express how she was feeling, and then to ask how I could help. So there's different approaches, obviously, that you can use in terms of coaching for empathy. And an exercise that I've used previously is the 2 chairs technique, which really helps people to look at situations from other perspectives. One client that I coached was facing ongoing frustrations with her boss that were coming to a head because of a particular project. And she needed to have a conversation, but she was putting it off because she was assuming how it was going to go based on past experience. But also the project was really important to her because she could see how it was going to benefit the organisation, and she felt very passionately about that. So I invited her to play out the conversation. So firstly, by sitting in one chair to voice her perspective, then swapping seats to represent her boss's perspective. So asking her what it would feel like to be in her boss's shoes, then voicing how she would respond, and what kind of points were important to her. And then this played out until the conversation had run its course. And after the exercise, she could appreciate some more of the challenges that her boss was facing from an organizational perspective, and the areas that she was being measured on. So it helped to reduce anxiety about the meeting, and we worked on preparing some questions that she could go in with, and talking about ensuring that she gave enough space for a response. And physically changing seats in the exercise is powerful because it really helps the client to shift their perspective and imagine themselves in another person's shoes. I read recently about one company that was aiming to increase empathy by asking men to walk around in heavy belts to feel see what it would feel like to be pregnant. And that might seem like quite an extreme example, but helping clients to increase empathy could also be something like wearing a face mask if you're asking employees to do it, or maybe going through the steps of a system that they've been asked to use. Okay, so taking one other example, this time it's from the self-perception composite of the model, and it's self-regard. So what this refers to is about knowing your strengths and weaknesses and liking yourself, kind of warts and all. From a leadership perspective, those with higher self-regard tend to show more confidence in their ability to inspire and to motivate others. And they tend to be confident to stand up for their own opinions, but then also importantly to acknowledge when they're wrong or if they've made a mistake. That can be a lot easier said than done, as many people tend to be a lot more self-critical when they mess up compared to how they would be with a friend. And this kind of harsh inner dialogue, like the little gremlin sitting on our shoulders that give us a hard time, that can undermine our self-regard and lead us to making assumptions or catastrophizing when things go wrong. So a useful coaching technique that can be used to help enhance EQ in this area is the ABCDE method. And this is based on rational emotive behavioral therapy. And it helps us to consider other perspectives rather than rushing into self-sabotaging, harsh judgments. And it also really helps with reality testing, because improving the balance between self-regard and reality testing also helps to boost our emotional intelligence. So we can bring this to life if I invite you to think about a recent situation where you might have overreacted or jumped to a conclusion. So it could be something relatively small, like thinking that you've offended a friend because they haven't replied to a text that you've sent them. Or it could be something bigger, such as thinking that you might miss out on a promotion because you've made a mistake in a report and that's been sent to the executive team. So first of all, A, think about what that activating event is, or the trigger. So in my example here, this could be the mistake in the report. Then B, think about what were your beliefs about the situation. What was it that was going on in your self-talk when this happened? So it could be, in my example, I'm so stupid. How could I have made that mistake? They're all going to think that I'm totally incompetent. I'm never going to get a promotion. I may as well just quit. All that catastrophizing going on. And then C is the consequences. So what were the feelings, the thoughts, and the behavior that accompanied your experience in that situation? So it could be, I was totally embarrassed. I'm just going to keep a low profile now. I'm going to stop trying to work towards that promotion. Okay, so now moving on to D. So this is where we're actively debating and disputing and discarding those self-defeating or maladaptive beliefs that have led to the C. So think about, is there any evidence to support your beliefs? How would an outside person look at this? And if a colleague was in a similar situation, what is it that you would be saying to them? Think about if there are any past situations that were similar, that maybe where your beliefs were actually found to be wrong in the end. So in the scheme of this whole report, actually the mistake was relatively small. There was still a lot of really good content. This report is just one piece of work out of a whole year, and everyone makes mistakes sometimes. So then finally, E, what are the effects of taking step D? How has this debating and disputing and discarding the irrational beliefs affected your thinking and your understanding about the event and the consequences? So if I hold my hands up and I acknowledge the mistake, I can move on. Dwelling on it isn't going to help, and it's likely that they will forget about it anyway. So I can press on with moving towards the promotion. So many people assume that their thoughts are absolute truths, and that A, the activating event, leads directly to C, to the consequences. But exploring the D and E in this exercise can really help to engage our rational brains that I talked about at the beginning, and that can then lead to much more constructive outcomes that help us to move towards our goals. Okay, so I wanted to end with a few thoughts on why EQ is such a key skill in the workplace. And these findings that I've got here are obviously also all pre-COVID, so there's going to be an even greater pull on these skills now. In their Future of Jobs report a few years ago, the World Economic Forum named EQ as one of the top 10 skills that employees would need in 2020. And it also underpinned other skills in the list, including people management and coordinating with others. And then more recently, at the beginning of this year, a LinkedIn report that was based on data from over 20 million jobs named EQ as one of the top 5 soft skills that companies most need in 2020. And the reason for this is supported by the academic literature, which shows a link between emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, and also the impact on employee performance. And that's even after controlling for the big 5 personality factors and IQ as well. So thank you very much for your time today. I'm going to hand back over to Priya, and I think we're going to take some questions.
Okay, I've unmuted. Thank you very much, Jackie. I hope everyone is finding some sort of insight or helpfulness from this webinar, and I kind of just appreciate all of you for joining us and for listening. So thank you very much. We have had some questions submitted to me that we'll kind of just tag answer between me and Jackie. So Jackie, could you take this? So why transformational leadership rather than other models, other leadership models?
Yes, sure. So you mentioned, Priya, about like transformational leadership gaining a lot of popularity. It's gained a lot of traction, and studies have shown that people consistently rate transformational leaders as being more effective compared to other leadership styles like laissez-faire or more transactional type of styles. And I think this is, really sort of tapping into, when I was talking about those different competencies earlier on, about leaders sort of inspiring others and motivating others, and giving them space to, so coaching and mentoring, and then giving them space to make their own decisions, and supporting them in that. And EQ has been, studies have shown there's a strong link between EQ and transformational leadership.
Okay, great, thanks. Another question, how do you sell EQI to people who aren't on board? I'll take that. So yeah, this is definitely one of the challenges that we tend to hear about. So in our consultancy, we do get people on our courses and just calling us up saying, how do we gain that buy-in from our clients? The MHS, so the publishers of the EQI tool, they actually do have this really handy resource about how to get people on board, how to communicate well, the concept of EQ. But I think the first step is to find out what it is that is their barrier. Is it because they think it's a fad? Is it because they just don't know much about the concept? Is it that they don't know if it's actually going to make any difference to their business success? I think after you've identified your client's needs, then you can start to bring about awareness of the tool, give them some like return on investment studies or cases, and we're happy to kind of provide you with that as well, because we've got some in the bank almost. And also, how do you think that the tool could help that client or help that company? Is it a specific issue that they have? Is it with their leaders or their teams, or are they identifying potential in people? Are they restructuring? Or is it specific scales that they might want to look at? So you can hopefully give examples of some scales that might come in handy to focus on. Perhaps it's impulse control and reality testing, or flexibility if your company is going through times of change or anything like that. But yeah, there is a resource to help you. So I think that is quite a useful thing to take a look at when you're looking at anything to do with emotional intelligence, because you do have to do that bit of that selling or promoting or just raising awareness about it. So I hope that's answered that. Are there downsides to high scores on the EQI? Can they be too high? Jackie, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Good question. So if I think about my profile, I have very high like emotional self-awareness, and that can be handy to know like how it is that I'm feeling in different situations. But actually the overplay there can be that I end up then like over analyzing every mood and why I'm having that, so that can get a bit tiring. I've read a little bit about empathy burnout. So basically when showing like too much empathy can become quite overwhelming, and you can imagine this in like medical jobs, for example. So it might, being very high on empathy might make it difficult to make difficult people decisions, for example, or being worried that you might be putting too much stress onto your employees. But just thinking back to the EQI model and what we've talked about around the balancing, so I think like the balancing is the most important. So if you think about the empathy scale, if you had very high empathy but your emotional self-awareness was low, then it might be that you end up putting other people's needs in front of your own all the time, and maybe finding that overwhelming. But actually, if those two are in balance, then it's likely to be that you're more aware of the effect on yourself, so that you can then manage that. So I'd say that thinking about this from the perspective of the model, it's about them being in balance is the main thing.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'm looking at two different screens that have questions on it. So if I already have a leadership competency framework, how can I map the scales onto it rather than the competencies in the report? Oh, the leadership. Okay, so the competencies provided in the EQ leadership reports. So you can hopefully do that yourself, or we can help you with that. So there is quite a lot of information that MHS provides you about the leadership competency theory that Jackie went through today. So you can have a look at your own competency framework and try and map that on yourself, or we could help you with that. So we have done that before, and we can kind of do that on a consultancy basis, which I hope answers that question. Jackie, how do you coach for lower scores on well-being or happiness?
Yes, so with the well-being scale, I think I mentioned that this is quite a good one to start off with when you're doing your debrief, because it gives a good indication as to how the coachee is feeling and like their kind of overall satisfaction with life at that time. So I would start a coaching debrief by understanding more, asking more about the situation that the client was in when they were completing the assessment. So for example, whether it had been after a particularly stressful time, or if there was anything going on that might have impacted the results at all. And then I would be checking in to see how they were feeling about the session and what kind of space they were in to have that coaching session. In terms of looking at how to boost well-being, the report gives you 4 different subscale areas that you can look at. So I think that's the self-regard, optimism, relationships, and self-actualization, I think are the 4. And so although it's a separate scale, if you look at those subscales and try to increase emotional intelligence in those areas, that should help to overall increase well-being, because the well-being it both feeds into emotional intelligence, and also it's a product of emotional intelligence. And then also at the beginning of the coaching sessions, I always do the contracting, and I talk about the difference between coaching and counselling, and about confidentiality. And if I was concerned that the coachee wasn't in the right space for it and that they needed additional support, then we would discuss what that looked like in terms of other resources they have available, maybe like the EAP scheme, something like that.
Okay. Thanks. And I think we'll just do the last question and then we can kind of wrap up. I'm already BPS level 2 qualified. Would I need to do a course to enable me to use EQI? And do you offer online conversion training versus full training? Okay, so to use and administer the EQI tool and the EQ360 tool, you do have to go on the full 2-day training. We do offer it online, and I think our next courses are August the 19th and October the 7th, and they're 2-day online courses. We're currently offering a 25% discount to everyone that attended the webinar today. But we will send you an email at the end of this today with information about that and a discount code that you can use. But if you're not really interested in getting trained in the EQI tool, then you can use us or use Jackie to help you with that. So you can contact our team at PCL to use the EQ tool for you on a consultancy basis. So be that leadership development or training or EQI feedback sessions or team days. And then you can contact Jackie for coaching inquiries for leaders or EQ or well-being. I think kind of just to wrap up, if the topic of emotional intelligence and leadership has sparked your interest, which I really hope it has after this, you may be interested in the Emotionally Effective Leader Workshop. It's something that's really great. It's pre-packed for you. It's slides, a workbook, and a facilitator guide, all created by a consultant named Drew Bird, and he works with MHS, who distribute the tool. So he's created this 1-day interactive workshop that you can deliver if you're a coach or if you're a facilitator or HR professional to a group of leaders to help them improve their leadership, to do it in an emotionally effective way, really. And that's based on a number of, I think it's 20 years of research and experience, so that's really helpful. And also, just to end again, Jackie talked us through the ABCDE method. If anyone is interested in using that properly themselves, there is a free resource that we are able to provide you with, and it will be in the exit email that we send out today. I think that's kind of all the points that I wanted to say. Is that all right with you, Jackie?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, lovely. I like it when we're on time to finish. I want to just to say thank you to everyone that attended. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening so attentively, and also for your comments in the chat. I've been getting quite a lot, and I just really appreciate it. I hope you will attend our next webinar episode. Details of that will be again on the email that we send out. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
All right.
Bye.